coast heritage was part of what the scholars call the Swahili Confederation. And the Swahili cities were all the way along the East African coast, all the way from Somalia in the north, down through Kenya, Tanzania, as far south as Mozambique. The main cities were Mogadishu on the coast of Somalia. By the way, that usually surprises Somalis to know that their history is in fact connected to Swahili history. Malindi and Mombasa on the coast of Kenya. Mafia and Kilwa off the coast of Tanzania. Sofala off the coast of Mozambique. And Sina, Mozambique inland. Now I'm using terms like Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique. Of course, during the time periods that we're talking about, none of these places existed under those names. Now let's examine what's in Fort Jesus Museum in Mombasa. They have this, and that is graffito they believe was done by Portuguese people. And you can see African dhows and some more dhows, and you can see Portuguese ships as well. And it shows that those ships mingled on the Indian Ocean. Also, the museums in Kenya have reconstructed dhows. And there's one of those reconstructed dhows. And you find it's not just dhows, there's multiple types of East African ships that they've got reconstructed. You can see 2 or 3 behind the main one here. So that raised the question, African ships on the Indian Ocean? Yes. These ships could carry 70 tons burden, and these East African ships were on the Indian Ocean, and we know that they go back at least 2,000 years because they're mentioned in a 2,000-year-old book. There was a guidebook that some Greeks had written called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, and it mentions that East Africa had sewn boats, and it's believed it's the same ones. And what it also means is that many scholars have theorized that East Africa is actually the place of origin of what is today called the Dhow. So the Indian Ocean trade. The seasonal monsoon winds shape the trading patterns between East Africa and Asia. In April, the southwest monsoon starts, and it will blow from southwest to northeast. By June or July, it created a strong northerly current that flows up the Somali coast towards India. And once people had got to Oman or India or wherever in the Far East, they would stay there for 6 months. And they would wait for the northeast monsoon, which started in November, and it reached its full strength in January, and it blew from India and the Persian Gulf towards East Africa. And so, if you were an East African mariner, you would be spending 6 months of your year in the East. Does that make sense? And if you were a mariner from Oman, India, those kind of places, you'd be spending 6 months in East Africa. And consequently, ideas and cultural artifacts spread between the two. And an example of this is scholars don't know whether the typical East African front door is East African or Indian. In India, there's something called Gujarat style, and the Gujarat style looks just like East African. And we truly don't know who got it from whom. And it's because of this 6-month stopover. So what were the trading products? The Zenj had a trade in ivory with India and China with the traffic passing through Oman. The ivory was used to make the handles of daggers in India and royal chairs in China. It was also used to make chess pieces. They were skilled workers in metal. Now, what was this metal? It was in 1978 that the scholars found out what that metal was. They also exported ambergris, which is a perfume, and rhino horn. Let that one sink in. Mic drop. And rhino horn supposedly had medicinal properties. And you can just see the inverted commas on this medicinal. People are looking at me blank. Aphrodisiac. Right? Which is the origin of the word horny. Okay. All right, they traded leopard skins and also timber. Mangrove poles in particular were sold to the building industries of Oman and Persia. Also, did he describe the people? He said, the Moors of Sofala, Moors simply means black folks. The black folks of Sofala clothed themselves from the waist down with cotton and silk cloths, and other cloths they wear over their shoulders like capes and turbans on their heads. Some wear small caps dyed in grain, in checkers, and other woolen cloths in many tints, also camlets and other silks. So that's Sofala, Mozambique. By the time we get the report coming out of Kilwa, the levels of luxury reached was astonishing. They are finely clad in many rich garments of gold and silk and cotton, and the women as well, also with much gold and silver chains and bracelets, which they wear on their legs and arms, and many jeweled earrings in their ears. And then the people from the island cities of Pemba, Mafia, and Zanzibar dressed in the same style as described for Kilwa, with the same associated opulence. Now, Pemba, on a modern map, is the coast of Kenya. All right, now, remember the description of the Moors of Sofala, Mozambique, because that's important. You see, when I visited Fort Jesus Museum, they had the traditional dress of a Bantu-speaking East African group called the Mijikenda. And those are the Mijikenda and how they're dressed. Now, doesn't that sound just like the description? And the significance of that is this. Scholars now think the people who became the Swahili were originally the Mijikenda. So Mijikenda speakers got to the coast, a coastal culture developed, a lot of people became Muslims, some continued traditional African religions. They developed a new identity as Swahilis, do you see? And then you've got the Mijikendas that didn't, that stayed inland. But essentially it's Mijikenda culture. Now, what else was depicted in the Fort Jesus Museum? Right, can you see that's a blacksmith? And can we put him into a context? Did I mention that a certain trading product was discovered in 1978, what it was? And it was some type of iron. It was actually steel. In 1978, 13 ancient iron and steel furnaces were discovered in Tanzania, and these East African smelters made the finest steel produced anywhere in the world between 500 AD and 1850 AD. And it was only after 1850 that their steel technology was surpassed. Did you know East Africans minted their own coins of copper and silver? Did we know this? There's one of them. These coins were issued in the 11th century. They had rhyming couplets on them, praising the king and praising God. And where have these coins been discovered? Well, according to the Daily Mail, that bastion of right-wing conservatism, how 900-year-old African coins found in Australia may finally solve the mystery of who arrived down under first. And let's read it. Coins date back to 6 centuries before Captain Cook. Are we feeling this? And so what this tells us is East African mariners were The documents tell us they were sailing to Oman, they were sailing to India, they were sailing to Java, they were sailing to Indonesia, they were sailing to China, they were sailing to Cambodia, where they established a colony. And we now have the theory that they could well have sailed to the northern fringes of Australia as well. A theory put forward by the Daily Mail. Right, now continuing our theme of metals, this is some reconstructed silver jewelry, which again they believe is in this 13th century context. And are you feeling this? Right, now can you see that they've got the silver bracelets and armbands, and then they've got the local name in Swahili. And the fact that it has a local name in Swahili means it's not an imported concept. You know, if you import someone's concept, you keep their name. So, you know, like, for example, the English word bungalow isn't an English word. Yeah? So, consequently, if you've got an indigenous name for it, it's not an imported concept. We ready for this? Left-hand corner, please. Silver handbag. Are we enjoying that? Okay, the Portuguese role in Africa. Early in the 16th century, the Portuguese sent their fleets and armies into this region. Dr. Basil Davidson explained this unfortunate episode. It was at Mozambique during his first voyage that da Gama exchanged the first shots. Back again on the coast in 1502, this time with a score of ships from home. Da Gama threatens to burn Kilwa unless its ruler will acknowledge the supremacy of the King of Portugal and pay him yearly tribute in gold. Ravasio does the same thing at Zanzibar and Brava. Meeting resistance, Almeida storms Kilwa and Mombasa, burning and destroying. Saldanha ravages Berbera. Juarez destroys Zela. Da Cunha attacks Brava. So by the time we get to the 16th century, a lot of the East African cities are now up in smoke.